Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Capitalism these days seems to be a word shrouded in negativity, a dirty word even so, especially in light of the financial crisis. Banks, bankers, bailouts, dodgy lending and ridiculous rewards for failure have all added to the sense that capitalism is bad and has failed us all. So, to take each in turn, banks, once upon a time revered and respected by the public at large, have fallen far and are now objects of hatred associated with poor judgment, reckless lending and irresponsible practices. They have come to embody capitalism. They have come to embody capitalism in its worst form. Bankers, now a swear word in its own right, represent the banks in human form. They are associated with greed, ridiculous bonuses and gambling of huge sums of money, none of it their own, leaving banks with pitiful amount of money left in reserve for when things go wrong. Bailouts. Well, there have been a few, causing taxpayers to have to dig deep to rescue banks deemed too big to fail, and while at the same time adding to the country's already large debt burden. Dodgy lending, in the form of financial products so sophisticated that they may as well have been made up as no one understood them. These were wrapped up and passed around the financial world, encapsulating monumental levels of debt that should never ever have been issued in the first place. Rewards for failure. Banks being bailed out when most businesses would have been expected to fold. Bankers, the CEOs getting their bonuses despite poor performance, all giving rise to an acute sense of unfairness, injustice and anger amongst the general populace. Much of this anger has been vocalised in various protests in the UK and across the world, movements such as the Occupy Wall Street, protesting against the undue influence of corporatism and governments and banks, and similar protests at various rich nation summits. At the end of the day, we all feel aggrieved at the financial world's fecklessness, as we have been made poorer or worse off in some way as a result, whether that be through higher taxes, higher costs of living, pay cuts or pay freezes. With no end of this apparently in sight, capitalism has a lot to answer for in many people's minds. And of course, there is much that needs fixing, given that all that's taken place in recent times. But for me, everything is relative. And capitalism, with all its flaws, imperfections and relative inequalities, is still a world beater of a system when compared with the alternatives. Capitalism is not a perfect system. It can be abused like any other. But when it is practiced fairly, it is a system that rewards through profit those who offer services or products of benefit to others. It is, or it should be, a win-win outcome from both buyer and seller. It is centred on private ownership and rights to property. It encourages competition and innovation, provides choice and opportunity, and in so doing, provides a much better way of life than some other systems can and have failed to do. It is for these reasons that most of the developed countries in the world have succeeded, and many of the emerging market economies such as China, India, Brazil and Russia have adopted capitalism, and their economies have grown tremendously and their countries have become transformed as a result. A huge positive side effect of this economic growth is that it has lifted millions of people out of poverty, and it's provided them with the opportunity to shape their own destinies in ways that they previously could have only dreamt of. China's economy has grown 100-fold since embracing a form of capitalism. It is now the second largest economy in the world and set to become the largest within a decade or so. And yet it is run by communists whose ideology is based around common ownership and a classless society. So it is ironic that its rapid economic rise has been as a result of adopting a system that encourages the exact opposite of these aims. Capitalism will have its critics, some with good reason, and it is important that this continues. It will never be perfect, and it will need constant improvement from one generation to the next. There will always be setbacks, usually when good times have become unsustainable due to too much excess and the economy being badly managed. Times then become tougher relative to what they were. Belts are tightened and lessons are learned. But things will typically get better over varying lengths of time. But let's not forget, although we are worse off only relative to what we were before the crisis. In comparison with many other nations using different models, many brutally suppressed, our levels of wealth and comfort, both before and after the financial crisis, are worlds apart from such countries. We mustn't forget how lucky we are to have what we have, no matter how angry we are at those in power. For me, nothing greater illustrates the success of capitalism more than post-war East and West Germany. I learned something about this on my visit to the Checkpoint Charlie Museum in Berlin last year. West Germany, occupied by Allied forces, was set up on the Western model of multi-party democracy, free enterprise and private ownership, whilst East Germany, under occupancy of the USSR, and in stark contrast to the Western model, was placed under single-party communist rule, with an economy run by the state, and it was a state which held no elections. Between 1945 and 1961, 3.5 million people fled from Soviet East Germany to the Allied occupied West, having suffered confiscation of their property, religious persecution, widespread discrimination, and large-scale deficiencies in food and supplies. This mass exodus resulted in the building of the infamous Berlin Wall and a border barrier system manned by armed guards. Over a period of 28 years, over 30,000 people escaped across the wall and barriers, many at risk of their own lives, and with many more killed in their attempts to escape. The wall, a famous icon of the Cold War, is also to me a potent symbol of the success of capitalism, because the wall was a sign of the failure of the Soviet model and other similar models built to stop people escaping. This failure was further compounded by those thousands of people willing to risk their lives to get over to the other side of the wall. So, before we get ready to stick the boot into capitalism, it's worth contemplating. Is it really so bad? Would we be willing to risk our own lives for a better alternative? What is the alternative?